One Burning Wing by Angelee Sailer Anderson. Read by Stanley Anderson. My grandsire was a tinker, come down the road with cast-iron pots and copper kettles slung across his back. My grandame watched him amble at dusk to her cottage door, and knew that he had succeeded already in selling his skill. It was his eyes, she says, her own remembering. Like gold coursing in the furnace they were, forming and melting and forming again. At the hearth she prepared a meal for him of goblets of mutton roasted on a spit between new potatoes, and served it with oat cakes and apples and whiskey that he drank neat. Afterwards, though it was midwinter, his bare skin struck sparks from hers like flint and ignited her love like tinder, so that she still feels the heat of him to this day. The morn following that night he left the seat of my mother and her. My grandame woke all a-fever to find herself bedded alone. Upon the bedpost hung the tinker's gabardine, where in a corner they lay heaped. His cast iron and copper were become mansions for spiders who squandered silk to make opulent draperies. Of the tinker himself there was no sign, but for the token upon my grandame's pillow that she keeps always by her and shows to no one. He was not the thing he seemed, is the whole of what she has told my mother in the 36 years since. Nor do I know more, but must some day come to learn, for he has left me a token also, a prodigious heritage, branding me an outcast among men. It was my grandame that named me, Iden, meaning fire. An apt name it has proved, flames having ever enchanted and tormented me, for that I long to embrace them, but can never safely draw so close. When a babe, not yet risen to my feet, so I am told, I would continually have crawled into the fireplace had my womenfolk not steered me away. Pitiful sight must I then have been, crawling lopsided for lack of a left arm. Not even in anger have my women once taunted me with my deformity, and have shielded me long as they were able from any who might. But I know well what I am, as my father knew. My father was a blacksmith, gone down the road, never to return, when he saw what his handiwork called forth from the forge of my mother. Time has come now that my mother and grandame can no longer conceal me, for I am arrived at my 18th year, and must begin to be a man. They have sewed me shirts of which the sleeves hang loose and long, and they assure me that, if I take care, none who behold me may detect that I am not as others. But I have known in my heart always that no pretense will avail, and my heart has been right in its knowing, though perverse in its rightness. In the town where I go with my women to barter, the lairds and ladies feign to look upon me with pleasure, the young girls especially. Well favored they tell me I am, with my more than common height, my yellow curls, and eyes, they say, that set their maiden sensibilities to blaze. But all the while they gawk at what they call my beauty, they cast sidelong glances where my left arm should be, thinking I do not see. How can I see anything else, when one sleeve encloses all that is wanting in an existence shaped only of want? But I can choose, yea, and shall, to dwell apart, as have my mother and grandame, and so escape the mockery of those breasts that may never be crushed against mine. So simple choosing seemed, before I met Anastasia. Now my wanting is such that it cannot be cloistered into numbness, for that what I want is a second arm to hold her. When first she spoke to me, I swore within myself that I would not yield to love of her, or any other. But the man that is inseparably grafted into my monstrosity has betrayed me. How can I not love her when I look upon her face so loving me? On the morrow we go walking together. I should not have consented, but her ringing, sweet laughter compelled me. Before then I must speak to my women, must ferret out the secret of my lineage, finally and utterly. And now I understand. Enough to be sure that for me there can be no rest, within Anastasia's arms or without them. Last evening I broached the matter with my mother, who said, "One thing only I know, that you do not know already." I was not a single birth, she told me in answer. I had a brother, or a sister as it might have been, for it, my twin, was not such as your grandame or her midwife could easily tell its gender. As it was stillborn, they had only to bury it, and your grandame crossed the midwife's palm with every groat she had to keep the woman's tongue quiet. She did not entirely succeed in so keeping it, and by way of many tongues wagging in between, I learned that I am twin to something bestial, something whose body your grandame afterwards dug up and burned. And the inhuman legacy of your grandsire resides in me also, though unseen. Woe upon my womb's conceiving that it should have left its mark on you. Beyond this she would say no more, but turned back to the pot she had been stirring, one of her father's own mending. Then I went down on my knees before my grandame, where she rocks beside the hearth. In answer to my plea, my grandame removed a small silken pouch from its place of hiding within her left sleeve. Strange that of all places she should hide it there. Carefully, lovingly, she drew from the silk my grandsire's token, 36 years ancient. And as the firelight stroked it where it lay athwart her fingers, as each fine shading of color flared from it like stabs of sudden radiance from the heart of a gem, I thought how familiar to me was this thing at which all eyes else might wonder. Then she told me what she guessed, only guessed of him who had worn it. But I knew beyond guessing, by my penchant for burning, and finally by the fate of his remnant held in her hand. For as she spoke, it rose into the still air as if possessed of spirit, soared into the flames and hovered there and began to blacken ere either of us could stir a limb to save it. My grandame cried out once, as she must have cried in the throes of childbirth. Then she seemed to resign herself, as all that remained to her of her sole lover turned to ash. Now you, she said, are all that remains of him, at least all that my failing eyes are privileged to see. For it may be, nay, must be, that somewhere in the earth he still keeps perpetual tryst with the sterile mistress that consumes him, wandering westward at whiles to beget children that can never know peace in this world. No peace, no peace. And yet I cannot hate him. And she closed her eyes and slept, and in this world she will not wake. This morning I walked the fields with Anastasia, her left hand enfolding my right. The hedgerows were in bloom all around us, and the sweet William, and the herb Robert, and the eglantine. At length we happened upon a rivulet. By its waters together we lay down. Anastasia's fingers caressed my brow, and her cool lips pressed closely against mine that were warm. And then, for all my torment of trying, I could no longer help myself. Love so stirred me that I allowed what was within my left sleeve to move, though only a little. She felt its moving, heard the unnatural sound of it. Tears leapt into her eyes and poised there glistening. "Show it to me, Aiden," she whispered. "Show me as you love me." I looked away from her. "There is nothing to show," I lied. "I am a one-armed man." "I know you are that," she replied, "and I know that you are more, as you love me, Aiden." Then what choice had I but to run, which I could not for the enchanting fetters of her, or to lie quietly shaking as she gathered my sleeve to the shoulder? Wonderingly she stroked what she had uncovered, each burnished feather, 100 tokens to match the one my grandame followed through the door of death. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. If only you could have seen it so these many years, as your glory and not rather your shame." And then, all unwilling, I wept, tears so hot they blistered my cheeks and singed my lover's hair where it trailed in them. If ever it could be well for me, Anastasia, your love would have made it so, but it is not enough. For now that you have touched the inhuman part of me, I know that no human touch can satiate its strange desiring, though the rest of me be ravished wholly by the woman you are. Then I proceeded to tell her of my grandsire, famed throughout the earth, though few know him as a shape-changer. And so you understand that this thirst to which I am yoked can only be quenched by a draught of flame. And what shall I do, Anastasia, when I myself am happy only in tasting your breath while it mingles with mine? Cut off what so offends me and be no more than a one-armed man in truth? I watched her consider, with all the goodly wisdom given her. At last, her paleness revealing what it cost her, she said, "I will help you build a pyre, Aiden. It is the only way." Though I knew that she was right, I could not have her faith. If the beast or God in me embraces the pyre, what will become of the man in me? "I do not know," she answered, "but I will be with you in the fire, Aiden, if not in flesh, yet in my spirit, and I will not be afraid." I have not her faith. I quail as I behold the pillar of white heat at the pyre's center, the spire of smoke churning upward. It sears the very space that yet separates me from it, sends emissaries of pain hastening before it along the feathered limb that has betrothed me to it. Ever the more inexorably as I approach. 3 steps, 2 steps, and yet one more, then I will stand within. Does my grandsire, nodding his approval, look on with mystic sight from his Arabian forest, perchance with the ghost of my mother's bird sibling at his side? How lately has he gone to his own pyre? How soonly must he? There is no human kind in him. He cannot know our bane of terror, though the man whose form he has assumed for the sake of gathering sons and daughters may have taught him something even of fear. What will become of the man in me? Even my faithful Anastasia does not know. Yet as I take the last step backwards, I see her eyes of love upon me, and I feel her spirit sustain me, and I recall to mind her promise, I will not be afraid. I will be with you in the fire, Idun. Turning to clasp my fate, I remember how that her name means resurrection. And I know that in truth it is the only way, for a one-armed man can do no more than bear the weight of a phoenix wing to a mouldering grave. But I hope that a man may lightly soar to life eternal on one burning wing. End.